Hi, welcome to GP Task Force and this short video regarding the GP Fellowships we've run over the past year. We've had GPs from a whole range of career stage, from newly CCT through first 5, first 10, 20 years post-qualification, and they all endorse the benefits of fellowship, the skills in terms of clinical and leadership and management skills that they've attained and now bring to their workplace, and also the powerful effect on retaining them within the GP workforce here in Derbyshire. I hope you enjoy what follows and that it leads us into further conversations in the future about fellowships.
My fellowship was in palliative care and end of life sort of workforce.
So I chose to look at how to support GPs in Derbyshire who go off for any length of time for any reason. So that could be often maternity or sick leave or caring responsibilities. That's what I wanted to look at, how to help them during their time off and getting back to work.
My fellowship I have called A Year in Menopause, which we started off with the idea I would be doing a menopause specialist skills certificate, the theory and then the practical, and that's how my time would be used, but COVID meant that I needed to change that quite a bit.
Yeah, so I looked at social prescribing because the fellowship coincided with the start of the new PCN structures and the establishment of a social prescribing network nationally, but of course I concentrate on that in Derbyshire. One of the key highlights was trying to understand the complexity of the whole system with so many different groups involved, and I think that was one of the big challenges as well, trying to work out how they all work together, but also the challenge for me was trying to see how I could support that process.
The first fellowship was looking around recruitment and retention within the Derbyshire workforce. So discussions and lots of thinking. We looked at longitudinal support networks. So this was putting groups of people together, and this ranged from medical students, foundation doctors, GP registrars, first 5 GPs, mid-career GPs, WISE 5 GPs, or those GPs within the last 5 years of retirement, and then those retired GPs. And it really looked at markers of recruitment, retention, but also resilience. And this really came to the fore when the launch event happened within about 6 weeks of us going into national lockdown with the first peak of the pandemic. That was called HUG. So it's helping us grow generations of GPs, which I hope will continue to develop and evolve in some form locally, regionally, and hopefully nationally as well.
I was part of that, and my group does continue to meet, and there's been huge value, I think, because like you say, that wide range of people across career, age and stage. So we have a couple of medical students in my group who it's been fascinating to hear the insights from them because on their education, their final year students, so it's an important stage, and hearing how their general practice training and being in that situation of learning very quickly how to remote consult has been fascinating. So what were your key learning points?
I think for me, I did manage to do my theory course before lockdown, and I'd read up on that before. So that was almost like the standard sort of learning that I would do. All sorts of different things. I was cold calling people at big companies, for example, JCB, Coors Brewery, Nestle, try and find out their occupational health programs within menopause training. I was looking at I did some surveys for people to see what their broad knowledge about menopause was, and then interpreted that. The learning point even within that was how to do a survey, how to interpret it, how to present the results, how to use the IT available. I have never done that as a GP at all in 20 odd years. I've never needed to. So I learned quite a bit on my feet from there. I also learned in many ways that I definitely work better if I have got time to do it. So knowing that I was being funded by the task force to do this learning and this work meant that I sat down to do it every week. It gave me the space to sit and think and look at statistics and look at what was going on.
So the role sort of quite quickly shifted into a how can we kind of improve just communication between primary, secondary care, and particularly thinking about the emergency services, so the 111 and 999 systems.
So I think that was my big learning, is that you can go in with an idea and it can be a great idea and it can work in lots of different places, but it might not work in yours. And if that's the case, you have to just be able to pivot and be able to think of something else that might be useful.
The pandemic aside, were there unexpected findings or avenues that you explored?
So I think just by having those networks and those opportunities, certainly the pandemic had a huge impact on the project itself, but it really brought to the fore how adaptable and resilient we were as a workforce, and also how the project really had to adapt under different constraints. And I think that was a reflection for me, is being able to adapt very quickly to what I had perceived would happen with my project from, you know, the start, the middle and the end, and then having this pandemic come in right in the middle.
So the use of anticipatory medicines by the 999 service. So prior to the kind of unprecedented pressures over the year, anything that was sort of end of life care, symptom management that ended up going through to 999 for whatever reason, the paramedics were powerless when they saw the patients. There was nothing they could do, and so that often ended up in quite a long delay in terms of actually the patient getting the care that they needed.
Interesting though, you're saying about the sort of networking opportunities. I know when you were looking at the referral data, you found some quite valuable support through the referrals colleagues, didn't you?
Yes, and I think for me, the term networking for me is very business-like. It's a very it's an active thing. People go out to network and find people, and for me, I've never actively done that, and I still didn't, but the people I called on remembered me from it was nice to know that actually some of what I've done in the past is now coming to fruition in terms of who I know and what to know and how I might develop it.
I think the biggest thing that I took away from it was actually in the time frame. It was the PCNs that were involved had a lot to organise in a very short space of time. And actually, when you look at it, it was quite an amazing achievement that the social prescribing schemes could be set up in such a short space of time. I think it was a matter of 6 months from inception to the scheme starting. So to employ a whole host of social prescribers, which was essentially a new role, it was a huge task, and PCNs achieved that remarkably. Now, when I went into the project, I was thinking that there will be perhaps a key framework to work to, or I think my role as I envisioned it was to try and support that process. And I think in hindsight, actually, it was much more complex than that, because there are lots of different component groups involved in it. There were the social prescribers themselves who were brand new into role. There were the PCN leads who were tasked with setting up this brand new service. But then there was the voluntary sector that were a lot of PCNs brought on board to help deliver social prescribing. But also there was the CCG as well, who, whilst they had some responsibility given to them by NHS England to oversee the social prescribing outlay, they were specifically not directly involved in its inception. So it was so the CCG was in a slightly in quite a tricky position as well. So it was I think the one of the key highlights was trying to understand the complexity of the whole system with so many different groups involved.
Yeah. Aside from the pandemic, were there unexpected findings or unexpected avenues you explored?
I absolutely loved reading the, was it 47 or 57 page document that I came across, that it was produced by the College of Obs and Gynae. I got thoroughly absorbed in it. I did look at the references, I did follow it through. I got quite agitated in a positive way about what we should be doing and what we could be doing, and at some point, you know, we may be able to do that. And if somebody had said to me before that, right, well, there's a massive document I want you to read, I would have been like, no, thank you, because that's then been projected onto me. Whereas coming into it, again, it came down to having the time and the space to do it the way that suited my learning type, the way it just that was, I was really intrigued by how much I enjoyed doing that part of it.
Sense that there was an opportunity out which was very, very different to my experience in from a clinical side of things, to be able to meet new people and have the time and the ability to sort of to network, which is not sort of something I'd ever really done before. Really not really had a need to network in that way. So it was a new experience, and something perhaps I was a little bit daunted by to start off with, but doing the fellowship sort of thrust me into that sort of arena. I was forced to drop, call, email, emails left, right, and centre to try and engage other people. So actually, it was a learning experience from that point of view.
What have been the benefits for you of doing the fellowship?
I think really, as we've kind of alluded to before, it was that chance to explore something about primary care that I was always initially drawn to being a GP because of, in terms of just palliative care being a big passion of mine. I know a lot more about how to deliver the administrative side of palliative care from, within my practice, just as a GP sitting in my room. I'm now a bit of the kind of lead for the practice in terms of who people will come to with how do we do X, Y, or Z for this person with their, with an end of life need. And then also the networking side. So yeah, getting to know people who I otherwise wouldn't really have very much contact with.
I think that's one of the benefits we've seen out of the fellowships, is that complexity of sort of inter-system, inter-organisational working. And actually, I think, like you, a number of the fellows found that they were helping a lot to facilitate some of those connections. So just being that link person with the general practice background is really useful. Yeah. And you were quite disciplined, like you said earlier, about putting your time aside. Yeah. But I think that's the real value, isn't it, of a fellowship or the new to practice working, that remunerates some of this learning, which is, yes, personally it's interesting and rewarding, but actually it is a part of our working pattern as well. It should be considered to be part of our work.
I think the thing is, traditionally we've just been expected to fit it all in somehow and keep going, and therefore your day-to-day queries will take over perhaps an interest. Having it set, and for me it was almost set in stone. I knew how many hours I felt was being asked of me on a weekly basis, what my annual leave was from the project, and that's how I did it. It wasn't regimented, but yeah, it was pretty organised, because otherwise it would have been easy for it not to be, because I've got the 25 years experience of not having time dedicated to do it, and therefore fitting things in when you can. So I think going forwards with the new to practice scheme, for example, that set time is absolutely key to developing the workforce and keeping people's interest and retaining them.
A fellowship definitely gives you the chance in those early years when you're finding your feet and you're not necessarily seeing all the stuff that you wanted to see, and can feel like you're not providing the care you want to. The fellowship really lets you see some of the bigger picture of that and unwind and sort of lean into your passion.
More than that, and I had great support throughout from both you, Susie, from all the office team at GP Task Force. So I can't speak highly enough of the support that I received.
You touched on the word retention. Can I bring you back to that? Do you think the offer of a fellowship helps us to develop GPs who will stay in general practice and stay in Derbyshire?
I certainly, for myself, it has definitely helped. It's given me a different focus out with but out with seeing patients on a day-to-day basis, and it's rekindled an interest that I hadn't really been aware I had, and doing it, and also getting to know more people and more colleagues and what else is out there, I think in itself will help retain me in the workforce.
What other fellows say is that being in the bigger system sort of picture, sitting on meetings or sharing clinics or ideas with other colleagues across the system, they get to realise how general practice is very much the linchpin of holistic care, and I suppose no more so than in palliative care, really.
And it's certainly led on to other things. I mean, since then, since fellowships ended, I've taken on a role as lead for the TCG in children's and maternity services. I've done that with one of Elise Brogan's, the other GP who's doing that, so who was one of the other fellows. That's, you know, I wouldn't have thought I had the confidence and the ability to do that in the past, but I think doing the fellowship sort of gives you that little bit of confidence that actually there's no reason I can't do that. Give it a go. And I've just embarked on the GP trainers course as well. So it's you know, it's certainly opened eyes and avenues to do other things. So no, that was I think that's certainly one of the legacy benefits of doing it.
Maybe I need to apologise on behalf of GPTF for making your life even busier.
Well, I've cut my clinical sessions. I only do 6 sessions now. So clinical sessions. So no, certainly the remaining sessions are busy. But again, it's a different type of work, and it gives you that it gives you flexibility, and it's a different sort of way of thinking, isn't it? It's refreshing, essentially.
Do you think it helps retain GPs?
Yes, absolutely. There's probably a lot of GPs who are in the same boat as me, who are working a purely clinical job, which is demanding, and are looking for other avenues. We know that the role of a portfolio career is increasing popularity, but sometimes it's how do you achieve that portfolio career? That was the biggest question, and so something like the fellowship was an ideal opportunity to explore that with some safety.
My personal take is that it does. I mean, when I CCT'd, for example, I hadn't thought of where my career would go from a clinical aspect, but in the space of 14 months, I've gone from locum to salaried to partner, because I'm committed to staying in the local area. I think a fellowship affords those opportunities that we may not necessarily get just from going into a day-to-day clinical role. And if you are getting opportunities to develop personally and professionally within a local area, I would hope that, you know, retention and recruitment would be one of the positive outcomes from that work, because I don't think everybody is afforded the opportunity to do something outside of their day-to-day patient interactions, and these opportunities really do allow development of different skills that you may not necessarily have, but those skills and that knowledge can definitely be translated into clinical practice. So I think it works both ways.
Thank you for your time. I suppose I'd just reiterate at the end of that, if people are interested and they don't know quite where to look for information, contact us at GP Task Force. We're quite good with our network, so we can put people in touch with other people. And of course, there's a new to practice scheme, which is great, and we can talk through that. So Shella, thanks so much. Thanks for what you're doing. If somebody did want to keep in touch, what would your advice be?
Well, there's now a fabulous website called GP Pause. That's the program that we've set up. So if you look on the GP Task Force website, it's got a great section, GP Pause. And my advice to both parties would be have a look. The fascinating thing I found was that GPs have incredibly different needs and wants. So some GPs really didn't need or want hardly any support or any adaptations when they went back to work, and some GPs really wanted a lot, and they did need extra input. They needed adjusted rotas. So what people want and need are just so different. That is the great thing about this. The GP Pause is very much self-directed, kind of empowering, so that practices and GPs communicate more about what will be useful for both parties. So yeah, that's what I'd suggest, is go on the website as a starting point, have a look, and there's some really good forms to prompt people to think and communicate with their practice.
Important to also recognise the role of academic research within primary care as well. So it's not always about clinical outcomes, it can be about workforce related issues as well. So certainly being able to present this work at a conference remotely and hopefully having this work published has been an unexpected outcome for me, which I certainly wasn't anticipating at the start.
I've connected with more people. I do think I've kind of networked, but in the most natural way. It has been lovely to just get to know more people and feel more part of the GP community, because as someone who only works 4 sessions, you can feel a little bit out of it. I think it's also made me appreciate the importance for me, of diversity in my career. I'm going to get a lot more from my career if I'm not just doing clinical sessions, and the fellowships really opened my eyes to that and the importance of that. And yeah, because of that, I've already got I've got a new role at the CCG, and doing the fellowship, thank you. Doing the fellowship made me look around and made me think I need something to replace this, because I'm going to miss this. So yeah, it's definitely had an impact on me, and I think it's probably just changed the trajectory of my career.
I strongly recommend fellowship to we have a lot of trainees through our practice, and those who are showing a bit of a spark for something X, Y, and Z that they want to do. Yeah, absolutely.
Knowing what you know now, and I suppose this is a bit of an invalid question because you've given us a sneaky preview of the answer, would you do a fellowship again?
Without a shadow of a doubt. I think when I was approaching CCT, I was thinking about what else I could be doing, and the fellowship really struck me as an opportunity to hopefully make a change and do something that was non-clinical related, but would also help with my clinical work. So I think through this fellowship I've developed leadership skills, project management skills, being able to communicate with colleagues from different backgrounds and different stakeholders. I think it's really important to recognise the strength of verbal and written communication when you're liaising with different stakeholders who all have different agendas, different outcomes that they want to achieve.
I'd definitely do it again. I really, really enjoyed it. I loved taking ownership of something. I loved pushing it forward and coming out with something that I do feel proud of. So I'd definitely do it again. And for that reason, I'd completely recommend it. GP is a hard job. It's really good, but it is a hard job, and it's so nice to do something else, which is still challenging, but challenging in a different way. And I think it's definitely made me think about my career and where I want to go.
Love to do another one. I would love to do an extension of the one I've done. I would recommend it to people. And also, I think I'd really want to emphasise, certainly for the way it was with us, with me, you do not have to be a so-called academic GP. You can be just a straightforward, normal GP.
I would certainly do one again. There's no doubt about that. I think it gave an opportunity. This is prior to doing this, I'd sort of been a 8-session partner for the last 8 or 9 years, and was getting to the stage where I was perhaps getting a little bit stale in that role and needed some other outside interest that wasn't purely clinical to stimulate, and the off fellowship base essentially gave me an opportunity to do that, the time and the backup to explore something completely new that was of interest. And so without that, I don't think there would have been any way I could have looked and spent the time doing what I did. So I think the fellowship was the only way I could have done that, essentially.